All right. Hello, everyone, and welcome. I'm Phil Levy. I am Chief Economist at Flexport, and welcome to our discussion on building resilient supply chains in the Americas. We have a terrific lineup here with us today to discuss these important issues. I will introduce them in just a moment, but let me first frame the issues a bit. In some ways, supply chains is just a fancy term for making things, how companies make stuff, and how they deliver that stuff to market. In other words, it's something that businesses do, not governments. However, governments do have a rule, and government officials have obligations that they have to meet, such as caring for the public health. And they have difficulty meeting those obligations if critical supplies are not available, as we saw at various points with pandemic-related shortages. So policymakers' goals are going to differ by the product. And let me say a little bit about three goals that one prominently hears put forward in thinking about sourcing and supply chains. For a narrow range of products, you hear suggestions of onshoring, and it could potentially be the right objective. In the U.S., for example, it's been required by law for years for a host of defense industry products and key inputs that those inputs be made domestically. This may make sense for certain critical or cutting-edge technologies, perhaps say quantum computing, but it's for a very limited range of products. And trying to onshore production of many other goods can result in costly mistakes. Plus, we're at 3.6% unemployment. That's why they put an economist on stage. For a second set of products, nearshoring or friendshoring may be the right goal. This can shorten supply chains, it can diversify supply, and potentially make good business sense. It might be a good goal, for example, to encourage more production of medical goods in places like the Dominican Republic, rather than being completely dependent on single sourcing from a foreign country far away. For a very large third category, however, the proper public policy goal may simply be resilience. Here, the goal should be to mitigate risks by appropriate inventory management and sourcing for a wide array of geographies, while being mindful of cost imperatives. This can help ensure that companies get the inputs they need, regardless of lockdowns, natural disasters, or other unexpected shocks around the world. So that's meant to set the stage. Let me now introduce my colleagues here on the stage. They are Kathleen Quirk, President of Freeport-McMoran, Guillermo Vogel, Vice Chair of Tenaris, and Manuel Macedo, President of Latin America for Honeywell. All right. So, Manuel, over there, let me start with you. Okay. So, Honeywell makes a diverse array of technological products for business, for the aerospace sector, also PPE, among other areas. What did the pandemic teach you about supply chain resilience?
Well, thank you, Phil, and first of all, thank you also to the U.S. Chamber of Commerce and the government of the United States for the invitation. And yes, it is a fact. I think everybody knows that the pandemic created a disruption. But even before the pandemic, we had also trade tensions. So the impact on supply chain is not just because of the pandemic. So why? Why is that? It's important to understand that companies want to have profit, and in order to sustain that strategy, they need to have and to keep up a competitive advantage. That can be done, and Michael Porter told us, a few years ago very well, be it through differentiation or cost leadership. And that's where the problem starts, when your supply chain, our supply chain, is impacted in a way that we cannot keep up with that competitive advantage. So if our products are not arriving to our customers because supply chain is blocked, or if the cost of logistics is so high that will take away your cost leadership, you are in trouble. And that's where the pendulum somehow of globalization that we're moving in the past, 30 years, actually, after the Industrial Revolution it started, but lately in the past 30 years with clear global supply chains, that's when it got stuck and turned to nationalism. But the solution is not necessarily one or the other, is to find solutions that either way keep that competitive advantage up. So we need to make sure that, be it the nearshoring, the reshoring, that whatever it is, that I completely agree, needs to keep up with competitiveness, needs to make sure that productivity is there, otherwise things will not work. And as an example, Honeywell, and we work across many different verticals, had already started back in 2018 streamlining its supply chain, manufacturing footprint, delivering, we reduced 1/3 of our plants. So we are capable of doing both demand planning, supply planning, and being close to our customers in a clear way. However, we learned two things: that we did not know, probably as well as we should, all our suppliers and the suppliers of our suppliers, tier 1, tier 2, tier 3. So that's a clear learning that all companies need to do, and we've been doing it. And the second one, which is as important, is the need to dialogue with governments and to understand what is the legislation, what are the policies, and to make sure that they are not against the business. So finally, as a conclusion, this is about collaboration between all stakeholders.
That sounds like quite an agenda. There's a lot to do there. We're going to come back to some of these points, but Kathleen, let me turn to you next. So critical minerals are one of the supply chain issues we hear the most about. The energy transition can't advance without these. They're essential to electric vehicle batteries, wind turbines, many other applications. Can mining companies keep up with the demand?
Well, that's the question of the moment. There's really a whole new element of demand emerging in the economy, and that's this decarbonization. As you said, it's very metals intensive. Electrification can't happen without commodities like copper. And the industry is not prepared, doesn't have the projects today in the pipeline to be able to move quickly enough to meet this demand. Some people estimate it requires 3 to 4 times more copper in a electric vehicle or in wind power or solar, renewable energies than the traditional methods of electrification. And some people estimate that copper demand is going to increase twofold over the next 15 years. And at the same time, the industry is mature. The industry has been working to identify projects that can be invested in to develop new supplies, but we can't, as I said, we can't move quickly enough. It takes probably 10 years or more to develop a new copper mine. And so we're all working very, very hard to identify new investments. It's going to require multi-billion dollars of investments. We are working hard to get more out of what we already have, which brings in the whole question about technology and digitalization and new artificial intelligence techniques that we can use to get more out of the resources that we already have. But it's a big challenge for our industry. It's going to require more than just investment. It's going to require innovation, and it's going to require new things like more substitution, more scrap. It's going to take all kinds of things, collaboration, to be able to meet these 2050 goals. And there's a mad rush to do it. We're a leader in we focus on copper mining. We're a leader in this, and we're excited about it, but it's quite a challenge because at the same time, while we're looking to make investments, we're also looking to reduce our carbon footprint. So even though copper is very important to facilitate decarbonization, we also have a carbon footprint in our mining activities. And so we're working with vendors to make sure that we use the latest and greatest technologies to have the lowest carbon impact we can while we produce a product that society needs. So being a responsible miner is also very relevant in today's discussion. It's not that we can take any shortcuts. We need to do it in a very sustainable way. So it's quite the challenge and quite the opportunity for our business. But in a nutshell, it's going to be a challenge to meet the demand.
Yeah, it sounds like it. As we sort of continue on timely topics, Guillermo, you're with Tenaris, which is a leading manufacturer of steel pipes, especially for the oil and gas sector. Prices are soaring for your products and for the energy products that you support. How are your supply chains evolving?
Well, first of all, thank you. Thank you to being here, for the invitation, to the Chamber, to the U.S. government. And, we have manufacturing facilities 16 countries all around the globe. So, the teachers have been different in terms of, the regions where we operate. So, for example, we're having a hard time in Europe because of the cost of energy. Europe is losing competitiveness. And it's going to be a big challenge in the short term to really regain competitiveness in Europe because of the structure and the dependency that they have created, especially on gas, with Russia. So we have had that effect. The Russia and the Ukraine situation has affected the whole steel industry very much because they have been a very, very important player in terms of the global trade. When you see, for example, they represented 30% of the metallical charge in global trade. They represent a big portion in ferroalloys, for example. If you talk, there are certain ferroalloys that they had more than 40%. When you see semi-finished. So really the ability that you have to move from one source to other, the problems that you face in terms of the transportation limitations that we have had, not only in terms of how the costs have risen, but in terms of the availability of the transportation. So it has been, I would say, a painful experience to adapt to that. But I would say that when we analyze the whole region, what we are perceiving is that we're seeing that a regionalization of a lot of the supply chains. We're seeing, for example, one region, which is Asia, where China is really the core of that chain. We see one more in Europe with Germany, and we see one in North America, which is the USA. And my question is, what is going to be the play of South America in this realignment of the supply chains? And when you see what has happened from the beginning of the 2000s to now, there was a very interesting article in The Economist where they show that at 2000, all of South America countries, I think with the exception of Paraguay, where the U.S. was their main trading partner. Today, when you see the map, China is the main trading partner, with the exception probably of Colombia and of Ecuador. So you see that thing moving. Then you see the political efforts that are being done. We saw the USA, closing this Indo-Pacific economic framework with 12 countries, a little bit in front of the TPP as an alternative to the TPP. With a strange thing, because the TPP, Canada was part, Mexico was part, Chile was part, Peru was part, and there is no part, and today, we are not part of this new agreement. So we have to understand, and I was very, very much happy to hear Mr. Blinken saying that this new focus in terms of integration. I think we have a very good opportunity, but we have to work hard. I think we have neglected to somehow this much stronger integration, because now we don't want to be dependent. And I think America, I'm not talking about the USA, but the whole continent, we can create independency for the West in foods, in energy, when you see the Vaca Muerta resources together with the fracking resources in the United States. So we have an opportunity, but we have to work in that sense. And in terms of resilience, I think that now after this experience, we all are thinking, okay, how can we adapt ourselves to really be able to confront, very difficult situations without losing the operation of our supply chain, maintaining the operation of our supply chain. And I think there are two aspects there that I think are important. Obviously, it's all of what we can do internally in terms of what you mentioned, reviewing your inventory policies, changing your just-in-time processes, looking in terms of, different sources, especially in different regions, so that you lose one region, you can face one. But I think one very important thing that we are trying to develop is really a much stronger digitalization of the whole supply chain, so that you can have a transparent view of what's happening in real time. And if you have a problem, you can react, you can really take data-driven decisions on real time by looking at the alternatives that you have and by knowing exactly where your suppliers are. And the second thing, Mr. Blinken was very, very open in terms of saying we are working with the private sector. And I think Manuel made a very good referral in terms of how to manage the regulation, the working with it. But I would like to take it one step further, and it's something we have been working in Mexico and the United States, which is, I think the private sector of both countries, or of the countries that we will be analyzing, have to work together in order to together propose policies to their two governments. Because I think that makes much easier the adaptation and to be able to really benefit from the competitive advantages. Things like data flows, things like cybersecurity, to have one protocol instead of having one protocol in one country, another protocol in another country. In Mexico, we have been working, for example, both private sectors in the border in order to create a much efficient border, in order to say not only investments in infrastructure, but in automation and in smart borders. And I think this is very important. And for example, in Mexico, I participated at the time of the initiation of the pandemic in terms of how to prevail what were essential changes. How we will make the essential change. And we started from a very weak position, because even the definition of essential change was one in the States and another in Mexico.
Yeah.
But the ability that we had through the U.S. Chamber and through the CCE, which is the most important representative of the private sector, which Mr. Francisco Cervantes is here, our president, and the ability that we have, the U.S. Chamber to operate with its stakeholders, and us to operate with Secretary of Economy, which was very supportive, Chancellor, Mr. Ebrard was very supportive. I think we were able to react fast. And we were not able to eliminate all the pain, but we were able to reduce a lot the damage by making sure that those chains won't close once they had met the health requirements that we needed to make the people happy. So I think that it's very important, this contribution, private sector, public sector, in both countries.
All right. You've given us all kinds of interesting stuff to think about. We are short on time, so what I want to do is a lightning round where I'm going to give each of you, first Manuel, and then I'll let you close this question. What are the key things that we need in the region to help it succeed as a supply chain source? You've already talked about trade policy a bit. Yeah. Would you like to add? Yeah.
I mean, there are several things, and Guillermo have mentioned many important aspects. But I'd like to bring to your attention that the growth engine in Latin America is very much dependent on transfers of labor as a way of growing GDP and not so much productivity enhancement. So whatever we do regarding supply chains, the nearshoring, onshoring, needs to keep that in mind, that this is not about transactional activities. This is about bringing to the region, developing within the region, suppliers that can actually add value and contribute to the GDP growth. It is true that, and I speak for myself, that our teams, our procurement teams, had a mindset that was very much trans-Pacific and transatlantic, in the way that they knew many times the trade rules that were taking place over there and the logistic arrangements in a much clearer way than in the Americas and in Latin America. So now we need to develop the local suppliers in the way I said, with added value activities. We're doing that throughout all Latin America, countries like Costa Rica, Colombia, Argentina. We're going there in our aerospace business, our building technology business, all our business, in fact, and engaging also with governments in developing, in a very clear way, suppliers. In Mexico in particular, where we have a very big manufacturing footprint and also technology footprint with development and research centers, we're working with the Secretary of Economy as well in trying and helping in developing the South and Southeast, which is a priority also for Mexico, exactly in the same way. But I highlight, this needs to be done in a non-protectionist way with free trade. So this is not about creating hurdles, but taking them away. And while talking about that, I will mention as well the trade agreements. You mentioned about them. So we have many trade agreements. There are countries in Latin America that have, the champions in that. That's good, but they need to be integrated, as Guillermo mentioned. So we cannot have things that just are, making sure that things are not fluid, like origin. The rules of origin, restrictive rules of origin between products. So we cannot sell them from one country to the other within the Americas. It needs to go through a third one. We need to take, that away. And as Guillermo also mentioned, we need to make sure that countries in the Americas align when there are pandemics on the rules, that the essentiality of certain goods is the same, and that we are not just creating, even if it is not a global supply chain, it's in the Western Hemisphere, the same problems that we saw with global supply chains. And just to finish, I remember that back in '94, there was the FTAA, right, the free trade area in the Americas, which finally did not succeed. Maybe this is the moment while we discuss nearshoring, onshoring, to bring this back, because that's the perfect way to integrate things.
I like the optimism. Kathleen, you get the last word.
Okay.
Key thing to think about for the region and supply chain.
Well, the region is so important for metals production. Between Chile and Peru, that's 40% of the world's copper. The U.S. also has a significant amount of copper production. So collaboration and working together, trade's important, but putting together a framework for mining investments, it's very capital intensive. Investors need some sort of sense for what the framework will be, because it takes a very long time for mining investments to pay off. Collaboration with communities, regulations, the framework around how we do business there. Corruption is always something that we want to make sure that we have a clear line of sight, that there's no tolerance for corruption when we make investments. So I think there's a lot of momentum around collaboration. I think a big recognition that we need to find additional sources of supply, miners that can have a sustainable future, develop communities, develop resilient communities, and have a win-win and alignment between private investment and host countries. And that's what we're focused on as we look forward.
Terrific. Well, we heard leaders ask for a bunch of ideas from the private sector for what we worked on, and thank you all for providing a lot of those.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.